All the gifts today. All the gifts. Oh. You are important to me. I need you to survive. You are important to me. I need you to survive. Amen. Amen. Thank you, Valerie, and all here. Thank you so much. Oh God, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O God, my rock and my redeemer. The Negro is your wise and timely sister. Reflections on Black leadership and white supremacy. So today's sermon is my pre-Thursday sermon. Unlike most times I preach, I actually wrote the sermon early in the week and not on Saturday night. Not because I'm a planner, but because I knew that on Saturday I would be out of town. But today's sermon is my pre-Thursday sermon. Pre-Thursday, we were in contingency mode. Gene had been detained. While living his life the way we all do, going about his business, loving his family, serving his community, a terror attack happened. Yes, it was a terror attack. Make no mistake about it, whenever a free person is walking down the street in a free society and agents attack violently with a motivated political agenda, takes a free person hostage away from all they've been, all they've known, and all they love, that's terrorism. Amen. Prior to Thursday, my intention was to deliver a clever sermon that would subtly connect the legacy of a liberal religious institution to the complicated legacy of liberal racialized democracy. What I had wanted to do was connect the complicity of so-called white liberal popular identity to the terror of a system that privileges white ideals, white ideas, and white needs above all others. It was a Herculean task, but I was ready for such a time as this. As your moderator, I was ready. That was going to be the gist of my Martin Luther King Day sermon. I had wanted to remind you that what happened to Gene was not an anomaly, but the extension of a system of white supremacy that privileges white ideas, white ideals, and white needs above all others. In so doing, I knew that I would be swimming against the grain. Even here at Judson, that I'd be preaching to skeptics who saw my association as a rhetorical leap. But then Thursday happened. While I was in Boston, gathered in a room of colleagues of color at our first ever Unitarian Universalist Association Staff of Color retreat in 2018, the first ever, my phone was blowing up with notifications and tweets as I gathered to discuss what is the role of staff of color in dismantling white supremacy in a white liberal institution. As I took notes on what my role is as a staff of color in a white liberal mainline faith-based institution in the epic work of dismantling white supremacy, so that I could report back up the chain of command to white leadership what they need to do, I could not ignore the notifications on my phone. As moderator of Judson Memorial Church, I knew that our dear Ravi was due to report to ICE for his scheduled check-in. And as our fierce leader, I knew that an army of supporters, activists, warriors, and prophets would be surrounding Federal Plaza. I knew that deep down inside our hope was that white supremacy would release Ravi, that our Jericho walk would cause for the walls of white supremacy to fall down, that like the last time, our beloved brown leader would spring from the halls of white power victorious. I just knew that this was what the notifications blowing up my phone as I was trying to teach white people how to deconstruct white supremacy was all about. Because despite the relentless pursuit of white supremacy, I'm always surprised when my intelligence is challenged. I am always surprised when I or someone I know is called a nigger. I am always surprised when a policeman feels unsafe enough to discharge rounds into a black skin. I'm always surprised when innocent black and brown bodies are detained. I'm always surprised when our commander-in-chief uses the dignity, yes, our commander-in-chief, uses the dignity of his office to blow racist bullhorns and dog whistles month in and month out. Even though these things keep happening, I am always surprised. So my expectation was that Ravi would be free, even though all signs seem to dictate the opposite. I'm never nihilistic about freedom. I always stand expecting a stay for not just immigrants, but for all black and brown people everywhere. But on Thursday, that was not the case. Neither was it the case that the notifications were solely about the detention and sudden collapse of our dear Ravi. The notifications were of a different ilk. As our Haitian brother Jean was swooped up by ICE unbeknownst to his family and friends, and on the very day that our leader of our renowned New Sanctuary movement, our dear brother Ravi from Trinidad and Tobago, was being detained, our esteemed President of the United States chose to utter another slur. A slur that would threaten the trajectory of my already formulated sermon. Why do we keep bringing in people from these shithole countries? You see, I was looking for a way to tie in immigration and racial justice. Sometimes it feels like these issues are siloed off. I was a little worried about my pitch for racial justice, how that would somehow be a disconnect from the milieu of immigration. How on earth would I connect the two? How would I go about the Herculean task of connecting the beloved legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with the unwarranted, arbitrary detention of our Haitian brother Jean and our Trinidadian brother Ravi? It had seemed like quite a leap. But lo and behold, from the highest reaches of power, the cosmos had hand-delivered the perfect connection on a tacky, gold-plated platter. It was a godsend. Suffice it to say, there is no longer a need to reconstruct my pre-Thursday sermon. The events of the past 2 weeks and their subsequent trauma just prior to Martin Luther King Day, and the opportunity for me, your black moderator, to deliver a sermon for such a time as this, leaves no irony lost. So here you go, my pre-Thursday sermon. As your moderator, your black queer moderator, your black queer extended term moderator, called from the dugout to pitch hit on Martin Luther King Sunday, long before we knew of the unwitting surveillance that our building was under, maybe I, like Queen Esther, maybe, just maybe, was made queen for such a time as this. That was my sermon pre-Thursday. Jewish and Christian tradition alike are very familiar with the story of Esther, an ancient tale that reads like a modern-day drama, with all of the palace intrigue of the Trump administration, a temperamental king, an insubordinate wife, a harem of mistresses, underlings carrying out the racist dictates of a despot. It's like a chapter ripped directly from the pages of Fire and Fury, which I highly recommend you download or purchase, if for no other reason but to protest the threat to censorship. But suffice it to say, if you've read Esther, you've read it all. For those who are not quite familiar, here you go. The Israelites are cast from the promised land of their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, find themselves in exile, first in Assyria, Babylon, then under Persian rule, under King Xerxes. King Xerxes becomes angry with his wife, Queen Vashti, who had refused to be paraded before guests for just sheer beauty. After much embarrassment, the king's counseled the king to choose a queen to replace Queen Vashti. So Esther, a Jew in exile, becomes the queen to replace Queen Vashti. While Esther was queen, the king issues an edict to destroy all the Jews of Persia. And guess why? Because Esther's uncle Mordecai would not kneel before Haman, whom the king had promoted to the highest ranking official in government. Do you hear me? Mordecai, a Jew, black, because back in August I told you all that Jews in the Bible were black people, would not kneel before the highest ranking official in the land. So let's get this straight. King Xerxes throws a banquet and wants to show off his beautiful trophy wife, but she refuses. The king and his friends, fearing the other women may say #MeToo, orders the queen, Vashti, be replaced by Queen Esther, a Jew, black. When Queen Esther's uncle Mordecai refuses to bow before Haman because he was a Jew, black, he issues an edict that all the Jews, blacks, be annihilated. This prompts Mordecai to appeal to the queen, saying, don't think that just because you live in the king's house, that you're the one Jew who will get out of this alive. If you persist in staying silent, what are we going to do? That's not what he said. If you persist in staying silent, in a time like this, help and deliverance will arrive for the Jews from someplace else. But you and your family will be wiped out. Who knows? Maybe you were made queen for such a time as this. So I'll say it again. As your moderator, your black extended term moderator called from the dugout to pitch hit on Martin Luther King Sunday, long before our unwitting surveillance of our building here and our detention of our dear brothers, maybe like Esther, maybe, just maybe, we were all made queen for such a time as this. But as I stand here in the rich history of Judson, I am mindful of the fact that there has been many such queens of Judson. Beginning with our founder, Edward Judson, who understood sanctuary long before New Sanctuary movement, as he established Judson as a sanctuary for Italian immigrants back when black countries weren't the only shithole countries. For such a time as this. Yes, as I stand here in this rich history of such a time as this, Queens, I'm mindful of Dr. Eleanor Campbell, who co-founded the Judson Health Center in 1920, made Queen for such a time as this. Yes, I stand here in the rich history of Edward Judson and Dr. Campbell, and later on, of course, the great Howard Moody, whom was made Queen. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me calling him Queen, for such a time as this. When he and Alan, Arlene, and Lori provided a sanctuary that provided abortion counseling and a refuge for prostitutes for such a time as this. And there would be other queens in whose heels I am unworthy to stand. Lee Hancock and AIDS, Michael Ellick and Occupy, Donna Scopper and New Sanctuary, Michael Busey and Jaw, also crowned Queen for such a time as this. But in the rich history of justice and inclusion, as I stand here in this such a time as this moment, something is missing. A silence that is deafening. So deafening that it leads me to consider a different lineage of queens. Queens who no doubt must have noticed the same silence. Queens who heard the words of Mordecai whispering, if you persist in staying silent at such a time as this, help and deliverance will arrive for the blacks from someplace else. Queens whom, while at Judson, no doubt believed that they were reigning at Judson for such a time as this. A lineage of Queen Esthers who reigned under the names of Joe Tucker, Valerie Holly, Carleen Griffiths, Freeman Palmer, Ken Samuel, Yolanda Pierce, Yvonne Harrison, TJ Williams, Osei, Gifo Sekou, Dr. Willie Parker, Michelle Thompson, Andre Daughtry, Dora King, Valerie Ross, Sinead Coffin, Roland Wiggins. These queens, of whom I know personally, no doubt knew that if they persisted in staying silent, deliverance from white supremacy would come from someplace else. And thus, in such a time as this, when black lives are systematically slaughtered for not taking the knee, black ministers and members of Judson know that we cannot stay silent. As Martin Luther King prophesied in his letter from a Birmingham jail, we Negroes are your wise and timely brothers and sisters. Wherever we are, whether it be in church, at work, in the gym, at the board meeting, in the media lab, in the kitchen, or surrounding the Jericho walls of ice, the wise and timely Negro is your sister and your brother who are always thinking, maybe, just maybe, we have been crowned queen for such a time as this. Like Mordecai and Esther and Tubman and Hurston and Garvey and Malcolm and Baldwin and Martin, we do not think that just because we live in white houses, privy to halls haunted with white supremacy, we are the one black who will get out alive. No matter how high the degree, how secure the ordination, how lucrative the ministry, how compliant the immigration check-in, the great heritage of black freedom fighters know that while at peace for a moment, we are never safe. As black and brown immigrants are being deported at tenfold the rates of white European immigrants, the wise and timely Negro cannot stay silent. As black and brown men who are 1 in 10 in the population but incarcerated at 7 in 10 versus white men, the wise and timely Negro cannot stay silent. As the rates of HIV and AIDS continue to creep up among black and brown people, while life-sustaining medications are openly dispensed to the white masses, your Negro Judsonites are your wise and timely brothers and your wise and timely sisters. As white policemen who murder the innocent roam the streets freely while slain black bodies are put on trial, the wise and timely Negro is your brother. The wise and timely Negro is your sister. As our culture takes on the great work of dismantling white supremacy, pleading you that if you love me, listen to me. Amid the silence that is white supremacy, the wise and timely Negro is your brother crying out, if you love me, hear me. 100 years from now, when the people of Judson scroll through our history, how will 2014 and 2015 and 2016 and 2017, the age of Black Lives Matter, be marked? Which queens will our spiritual descendants read about? Even as great Judsonites forged a structure to shelter Italian immigrants, aided and abetting women seeking pre-legal abortion, memorialized the lives of those who died of AIDS when many would not, and pioneered a new sanctuary movement accompanying hundreds to periodic check-ins, while our archives persist in staying silent amid the movement of Black Lives Matter, your wise and timely Negro is your brother and is your sister. King Xerxes listened to Esther, who listened to Mordecai and freed the Jews. The Unitarian minister, Reverend James Reeb, listened to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and died as a martyr in Selma. Bree Newsom listened to the blood of those martyred by a 21-year-old white supremacist at Mother Emanuel when she climbed the flagpole in Columbia, South Carolina to unhang the Confederate flag. Heather Heyer, martyred in Charlottesville because she was listening to the Black vice mayor of Charlottesville, Wes Bellamy, his strategy to tear down the monuments of the Confederacy. Will this generation of Judson listen to our wise and timely brothers and sisters as we rail against white supremacy? Will you hear your queens who may have been coronated for such a time as this? For if you persist in staying silent, in a time like this, help and deliverance will arrive for the blacks from someplace else. But you and your church may be wiped out.